promoting dialogue.
It's midday in Dakar, 1 p.m. in Cotonou. Good afternoon and welcome to Newslink and West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting on 94.9 FM and around the world on wadr.org. Here are the top stories. Benin heads toward one-party parliament as political reactions follow provisional results.
This is a disappointment. This result confirmed the struggle that the Democrats Party has been waging for about 2 years now.
Sierra Leone marks National Remembrance Day to commemorate end of the civil war. African leaders push for coordinated peace efforts in eastern DRC and Great Lakes region. And Senegal erupts with celebration as Teranga Lions lift AFCON trophy for the second time. Please stay tuned for details of these stories and more.
On the news, this is Sankulu Jibril Janko.
Newslink begins in Benin, where reactions emerging from the political class following the publication of the provisional results of the legislative and municipal elections held on January 11. Figures released by the Independent Electoral Commission place the two parties aligned with the ruling coalition clearly in the lead. The country now appears headed toward one-party National Assembly with no opposition representation. The results are being contested by the main opposition party, the Democrats. On the side of the ruling majority, however, the outcome is being welcomed. Imo Edit reports.
According to the provisional data from the Electoral Commission, only two political parties, the Progressive Union for Renewal, UPR, and the Republican Bloc, BR, met the required thresholds to qualify for the allocation of parliamentary seats. By contrast, the Democrats Party, led by former President Boniaye, despite securing 16.16% of the national vote, would not be represented in the 10th legislature. This situation has sparked strong reactions within the Democrats Party. Guy Mitope, the party's national secretary for communication and also a candidate in the election, has blamed the current electoral framework.
This is a disappointment. This result confirmed the struggle that the Democrats Party has been waging for about 2 years now. We have denounced this electoral code, saying that it clearly favors parties aligned with the ruling coalition. We were excluded from the municipal elections and now from the parliamentary elections, for which it seemed we were finally being given a chance. This result only reinforces what we have been warning about.
On the side of the ruling coalition, particularly within the Progressive Union for Renewal, re-elected MP Orden Aladatin says the party would have stood a better chance by accepting the governance agreement mechanism.
If you look at the Democrats, they scored less than 10 out of the 12 electoral constituencies in Benin. It is not a question of 20%. In the past, some parties were overwhelmingly dominant in 2 or 3 regions of the country, and we saw the problems that were created, particularly with regional parties. That is why we said the system needed to be reformed.
According to the main trends released by the Electoral Commission, the Progressive Union for Renewal leads with more than 41% of the vote, followed by the Republican Bloc with over 36%. The two parties would share all the seats in the National Assembly, 60 for UPR and 49 for BR.
Imo Eded filed that report with our correspondent Aziz Adam Sule's report. While still in Benin, according to the figures published by the Electoral Commission, a one-party parliament is emerging with two parties aligned with the ruling coalition winning all 109 seats in the National Assembly. The main opposition party, the Democrats, will not be represented in the new legislature. Their party has also been excluded from the upcoming presidential election, raising concerns about its political future. Well, to appreciate what lies ahead for the Democrats, let's hear from Beninese political analyst Abdoulaye Amazad.
La politique, vous savez, c'est l'art tout de même de se surpasser.
Politics, as you know, is ultimately the art of rising above differences and at times reaching agreements with other political parties in order to remain relevant. The central question today is whether the Democrats have that capacity. Everything hinges on this, their ability to move beyond a rigid posture that defines them solely as an opposition force and willing to engage in dialogue with other opposition parties. In this context, there is another opposition party that some describe as a sellout. The opinions differ. Nevertheless, if the Democrats are to continue to exist politically, it is their responsibility to consider forging alliances, particularly with the FCBE, the Forces Chorus for an Emerging Benin. which has a candidate in the presidential election and positions itself as an opposition party. Secondly, to ensure their long-term survival, it is crucial for the Democrats to remain active in political debate. The absence of parliamentary representation does not signal the end of a political party, nor does it mark the end of political ideas. It is therefore imperative for the party to continue to assert itself through debate and concrete proposals, with the objective of evolving from a force of opposition into a force of proposition.
Non d'opposition, mais de proposition.
Beninese political analyst Abdoulaye Amazad. In Sierra Leone, the National Day of Remembrance was launched yesterday. The day was declared by President Julius Maada Bio to commemorate the end of the country's civil war in 2002. The initiative follows one of the key recommendations of the Truth, Reconciliation and Reparations Commission, which was tasked with identifying responsibility for this dark chapter in Sierra Leone's history. Abdullah Hassan reports.
Sunday's commemoration was used by authorities in Freetown to call on Sierra Leoneans to uphold a duty of remembrance and solidarity. January 18 remains a symbolic date in the country, marking the end of the 11-year civil war in 2002. While many victims continue to call for full justice, President Julius Maada Bio said it was necessary to mark the day in order to better understand the real causes of the conflict and to prevent a recurrence in the years ahead. In his national address, the Sierra Leonean president apologized to victims on behalf of the nation. He said he could not ask the victims to forget, but appeal for the nation in its own time and its own way to find the grace to fully heal, restore dignity, and move forward together. Even before the executive's address, researchers and non-governmental organizations had raised concerns about a tense political climate as the presidential election approaches in 2028. These civil society groups are calling for a greater responsibility in public debate, urging vigilance ahead of the official opening of the campaign period and the elimination of all hate speech. On March 23, 1991, Sierra Leone was plunged into war when the Revolutionary United Front launched an offensive claiming it was seeking to liberate the country from a system plagued by corruption, injustice, and the neglect of the population. The conflict dragged on, marked by the burning of villages in the east, abuse of civilians, the recruitment of children, and widespread sexual violence, among other atrocities. The war officially ended on January 18, 2002, with the arrival of United Nations forces in the country and the gradual disarmament of combatants.
Abdullah Hassan with that report.
More stories coming up on West Africa Democracy Radio. Newslink continues.
A renewed call for a visa-free Africa is gaining momentum, spearheaded by the Ghanaian advocates who are determined to dismantle the bureaucratic barriers hindering intra-African travel and trade. Former Ghanaian Member of Parliament Rose Mubarak is leading the charge. The Trans-Africa Tourism and Unity Campaign, an initiative aimed at realizing the long-held vision of a borderless continent. The campaign, which recently made a stop in Liberia, has garnered support from Ghana's ambassador to Liberia. WDR's Monrovia correspondent Abraham Parker reports.
The visiting team members are expected to meet with their Liberian counterpart to hold discussions on the importance of a visa-free Africa. The former MP Ras Mubarak, who is the lead campaigner, lamented the unrealized potential of this vision, emphasizing the difficulties faced by Africans traveling within Africa due to visa requirements. To underscore the challenges, he recounted his teams joining across the continent by road, exposing the practical obstacles encountered by ordinary Africans.
Today it's difficult for a Liberian to travel from Liberia to North Africa because they are required to have visas. And so we took it upon ourselves as young Africans who are passionate about the prosperity of this great continent to travel by road. So you can imagine a market woman who is trading perishable goods, who has to cross the border, and it so happens to be on a Sunday, and she's unable to travel on a Sunday. These are real challenges that, ordinary Africans are going through trying to move from one country to the other.
Ghanaian ambassador to Liberia, Godwin Amozen, emphasized the critical need for decisive action and the leadership to everyone to overcome the persistent challenges that impede the free movement of Africans within their own continent.
Liberia is the 30th country. They've met policymakers, they've met presidents, politicians, and it is our hope that their campaign would yield fruit so that we have this visa-free Africa without hurdle.
The campaign's message resonates with the growing call for greater intra-African cooperation and economic integration, challenging policymakers to prioritize the dismantling of barriers that impede the continent's progress. For Newslink on WADR, Abraham Parker, Monrovia.
In Mali, former Prime Minister Choguel Maiga has spoken once again, calling for reconciliation between Mali and Algeria at a time of heightened diplomatic tensions between the two neighbors. From his cell in Koulikoro, former Malian Prime Minister Choguel Maiga has addressed Algerian President Abdelmadjid Tebboune, urging a reconciliation between Mali and Algeria. This latest public statement by the former Prime Minister comes as relations between the two countries have significantly deteriorated in recent years. Francis Boniface has the details.
In a letter published in the Malian press, Choguel Maiga calls for a return to dialogue between Algiers and Bamako. Addressing Algerian President Abdelmadjid Tebboune, whom he described as a highly respected elder, the former head of the transitional government urges both sides to turn the page and strengthen the friendship that binds the two countries. He recalls the historical ties between the two peoples and calls for a de-escalation of tensions. Since the military came to power in Bamako in August 2020, relations between Mali and Algeria have sharply deteriorated. Malian authorities accuse Algeria of supporting terrorist groups and providing them with rear bases, accusations that Algerian officials have consistently denied. In 2024, while Choguel Maiga was still Prime Minister, Mali withdrew from the Algiers Agreement. The accord, signed in 2015 between the Malian government and the northern armed groups under Algerian mediation, was aimed at ending the conflict. The decision further strained relations between the two countries. In April, Mali accused Algeria of shooting down one of its drones in Tinzaouaten, a border area between the two countries. Since then, cooperation between Bamako and Algiers has come to a standstill, with both countries mutually closing their borders. For now, neither Mali nor Algerian authorities have reacted to Choguel Maiga's public statement. For the record, the former Prime Minister has been in detention since August 2025 on charges of damage to public property, forgery, and the use of forged documents.
Bamako correspondent Aliu Cham's report voiced by Francis Boniface. Diplomatic efforts to consolidate peace in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo and across the Great Lakes region are continuing. The Togolese capital, Lomé, hosted a meeting over the weekend focused on the coherence and effectiveness of African-led peace initiatives in a region that has endured decades of instability. The gathering brought together former heads of state, mediators, and special envoys. Nadi Tete has the details.
At the center of the discussion was a key concern: ensuring the success of mediation mechanisms and strengthening the coherence of African action in response to the persistent security crisis in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. For the president of the Togolese Council, Faure Gnassingbé, it is now imperative to move beyond declarations and towards coordinated action.
We are no longer at the stage of repeating diagnoses or issuing overlapping statements that do not reinforce one another. The situation in the Democratic Republic of Congo and the Great Lakes region demands coherence in our actions. Recent efforts have helped preserve an active political space, and this is a significant achievement. However, that space must now deliver lasting compromises capable of withstanding time, external shocks, and the fragilities of the regional and international environment.
Around the table, former heads of state, mediators, and special envoys emphasized the need for better coordination between initiatives led by the African Union, the East African Community, and the Southern African Development Community. SADC. Participants also stressed the urgency of placing civilian populations at the center of peace processes as ongoing armed violence continues to cause mass displacement and prolonged humanitarian crisis. This point was highlighted by Commissioner for the Department of Political Affairs, Peace and Security, PAPS, of the African Union, Bakole Adoye.
The initiative in Lomé today marks a defining step towards refining and strengthening the African Union-led mediation. It reflects a shared commitment to a unified, coherent, and inclusive approach, guided by a clear strategic vision and a concrete work program respectfully submitted for the consideration and endorsement of the mediator.
At the end of the meeting, participants agreed to continue consultations in order to develop a common roadmap. The objective is to lay the foundations for lasting peace in Eastern DRC and across the wider Great Lakes region.
Lomé correspondent Sylvie Wadr goes report voiced by Nadidi Tete. You're listening to Newslink on West Africa, the Macras Radio, broadcasting from Dakar, Senegal. Here is a reminder of our top stories. Benin heads towards a one-party parliament as political reaction follow provisional results. Sierra Leone marks National Remembrance Day to commemorate end of civil war. African leaders push for coordinated peace efforts in Eastern DRC and Great Lakes region. And Senegal erupts with celebration as Teranga Lions lift AFCON trophy for the second time. Still ahead in the news, we have press review, guest interview, and sports news. Please stay with us.
Fresh and breaking news all the time. Hear it first as the news breaks, only on West Africa Democracy Radio. Newslink continues.
There's some health news now. For many doctors and patients, the crisis in Nigeria's health sector goes beyond staff shortages to include basic challenges such as unreliable electricity in operating theaters and exhaustion after long shifts. The federal government now says it is taking steps to address both human and system failures in hospitals across the country. Correspondent Yacheni Sasetu reports from Abuja.
For doctors working through the night and patients arriving at hospitals in critical condition, unreliable electricity can mean delayed care, increased stress, and avoidable risks. Against this backdrop, Nigeria's government has inaugurated new committees aimed at addressing both human and structural weaknesses in the health sector, with a focus on doctors' welfare, patient safety, and electricity supply in health facilities. Speaking in Abuja, the Minister of State for Health and Social Welfare, Dr. Isiaq Adekunle Salako, announced the inauguration of a 24 interagency technical committee to implement the Nigeria Power for Health initiative. The program is designed to provide reliable and sustainable electricity to hospitals nationwide.
By the end of 2027, at least 30% of our health facilities will have uninterrupted power supply. That is the promise that we made, which Mr. President has approved.
Alongside this initiative, the government has also set up 2 ministerial committees to address excessive work hours for doctors, locum engagement practices, and long-standing disputes over residency training certification. Dr. Salako warned that overworked doctors combined with poorly powered health facilities creates a dangerous situation for patient care.
So it has now become a responsibility for all of us to ensure that we put together everything possible, mobilize funding, mobilize support, provide the technical support.
With attention now focused on both people and power, the government says its goal is to build a health system where care is safe, humane, and uninterrupted. For WADR, Yechinu Sasitu in Abuja.
This is the Newspaper Review. Stay abreast and find out what the top stories are in your country.
This is the Newspaper Review.
The Newspaper Review.
Now let's head back to Abuja for the press review with Usman Omar.
These are the stories we're tracking. Beginning with Vanguard, 52 suspects arrested in Ekboma, Edo State for looting, vandalism. Alleged forgery in UK property case. Federal government files criminal charge against Ozekome. Mike Ozekome is Senior Advocate of Nigeria. In economy, Vice President Kashim Shettima to present Nigeria's 2026 economic outlook in Davos, Switzerland. Moving to this day, APC chieftain Oyintiloye demands more sensitization on new tax laws. The new laws took effect on January 1st, and in security matters, Ondo State Amotekun arrests 17 suspected kidnappers. Moving to Guardian, federal government set to inject additional 30 billion naira to stabilize and rehabilitate 74 federal universities. And in security, NAF kills over 40 insurgents, disrupts Borno attacks. Lastly, the Nation newspaper, Speaker of Kano State House of Assembly condemns killing of woman and her 6 children. But on a positive note, 3 suspects are in police custody over killing of the mother and her children. And that's it on Press Review from Nigeria. Back to you in the studio.
Thank you very much, Yachenu Sasetu, with the Press Review from Nigeria.
Politics,
analysis on major news,
social matters, and all. This is A Guest.
Well, our guest this afternoon is Abdullahi Amazad, a Beninese political analyst. He provides an analysis of the January 11 legislative and municipal elections, the provisional results published by the National Autonomous Electoral Commission, SENA, of Benin. According to the figures published by SENA, a single-party National Assembly is emerging, with 2 parties aligned with the president securing all 109 parliamentary seats. The main opposition party, the Democrats, will not be represented in this new legislature. The party is also barred from participating in the next presidential election. In this context, our guest Abdullahi Amazad speaks.
Alors, une surprise, pas vraiment, parce qu'on s'attendait plus ou moins à ce genre de résultat.
So, not really a surprise, because we more or less expected this kind of result, which reflects, in a way, the current state of the Beninese political class, dominated, let's say, by the majority bloc, represented primarily by the 2 major parties, figureheads of the head of state, especially in legislative matters. We observed this throughout the last legislature, the 9th, and we can therefore see that this trend was more or less premeditated. The second thing we observe at this level is that the 2 major parties do not face any real opposition on the ground, because these 2, which, let's say, since 2019 have entrenched themselves in Beninese political life by absorbing the much smaller political parties. What is surprising is much more the rise to power of the second party, the BR, the Republican bloc, which is making an exceptional rise to power. And this merely denotes that the UPR has remained stagnant, but that the Republican bloc has taken up space.
How can we understand the absence of Democrats in parliament when they had 28 MPs in the previous legislature?
Alors, c'est difficile à comprendre, mais en même temps...
So it is. Difficult to understand, but at the same time, it's easy to explain. Difficult to understand because, indeed, in the last legislature, they managed to have about 20 members, which is significant in an assembly of 109 members. And in practice, during their term, I think they did a fantastic job. They managed to make their voices heard. They managed to leave their mark with regard to certain laws that were passed during this 9th assembly. They were also present, in any case, in their own way, in the political debate, even if there's a lot to say about that. What's incomprehensible is that they still managed to mobilize 16% of the vote in these legislative elections. But they really struggled to meet the requirements because the new electoral code introduced changes, notably related to a quota of 20% in all the constituencies' electoral districts. Since Benin has 24 constituencies, it was important for the Democrats as well as for the political parties aspiring to be in parliament, so it is imperative to have those 20%. So that's what was lacking. And I think the Democrats have denounced it on several occasions, at least every time they have had the opportunity to denounce this 20% quota imposed on parties for legislative elections.
The opposition is pointing the finger at the electoral code and its 20% threshold. You mentioned this in all 24 electoral districts of the country. Is this justified? What are your thoughts on this?
Oui, le quota de 20% était au sens propre.
Yes, the 20% quota was quite literally a barrier. But you know, we are in politics and barriers are meant to be overcome. So perhaps at their strategic level, they didn't manage to win all the electoral districts to the required 20% threshold. And the other thing, and this is where they really failed, they didn't manage to secure governing agreements with the other parties because it was stipulated that a political party could sign a governing agreement with another party to overcome this difficulty imposed by the 20% quota. This would mean that if the Democrats had signed a governing agreement with the Republican bloc, for example, they would only need to get 10% in an electoral district where they aren't as popular to reach that required quota. So I think it was a strategy based on a half-hearted retreat that didn't work, that didn't function. And it's certainly time to learn lessons from this strategy, which, for me, shows the real inability of this party to rise above itself.
What future is there for the Democrats, knowing that they will not be represented in the municipalities and knowing that they will also not be represented in the presidential election?
La politique, vous savez, c'est l'art tout de même de dépasser.
Politics, you know, is the heart of transcending differences and sometimes even reaching agreements with other political parties to ensure their continued existence. Do they have the capacity to do so today? That's the crux of the matter. The Democrats' capacity to overcome, I would say, the precarious position of being an opposition force which preludes any discussion or dialogue with other opposition parties. It is up to the Democrats, in order to continue to exist, for example, to forge an agreement with the Kari, Bennett, and Magnet forces, which are for candidate in these presidential elections in opposition as opposition parties. Secondly, to ensure their survival, it is important that the Democrats maintain their presence in the political debate because not being represented in parliament does not mean the end of political party, much less the end of political ideas.
That's our guest there speaking on political Beninese political analyst. Well, you still hear the sound even though the AFCON final was played yesterday. Perhaps tomorrow you will hear our original sports jingle back. But for today, let's maintain it because in sports, Senegal were crowned African champions after edging host Morocco 1-0 in a dramatic 10s AFCON 2025 final in Rabat. A solitary goal from Pape Gueye proved decisive in a fiercely contested showdown between the two Lions. Drama peaked in the final moments when Senegal briefly walked off the pitch following a controversial penalty awarded to Morocco, but play resumed and tournament top scorer Brahim Diaz missed the spot kick. Well, victory hands Senegal their second continental title, added to their historic triumph in 2021. Meanwhile, following the victory of the Teranga Lions, Senegalese President Bassirou Diomaye Faye joined the Senegalese people in celebrating the historic win. Scenes of jubilation unfolded last night in front of the presidential palace. Supporters gathered in large numbers. Well, we've come to the end of this edition of Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting from Dakar, Senegal. Thank you for listening, and many thanks to Ismaila Kamara and Maud Ju for the technical assistance. Do interact with us via social media platforms, X, Instagram at WDR English, and on Facebook, WDR English Service. I am Sankule Janko. Good afternoon.
And many thanks to you for listening to Newslink via Hot 104.3 FM, New Me FM 94.0,
Hilltop Radio 104.7 FM,
and Veritas Radio 102.9 in Banjul, the Gambia. We also appreciate our listeners in Liberia via Alternative Youth Radio 98.9 FM, Lofa County,
Radio Kagama 94.5 FM, Niba County, DCN Radio 91.3 FM, Riverside County, Wakat FM Radio, Banga, Liberia, Radio Baf FM 91.3 Sierra Leone in Nigeria, and Love 104.5 FM Abuja.
For you listening via Radio Pad 95.1 Damango, Savannah region, and on Royals FM 104.7 Wenchi, Ghana, we say a big thank you. Remember, West Africa Democracy Radio is all about you, your views, and your opinions.